Thank you for registration and welcome to the first session of Human Resource Management Training, HR Fundamentals for Grassroots Community Organizations. My name is Yasin Samim, and I am the Senior Program Coordinator with Equity Stream at OCASI, the Ontario Council of Agencies Serving Immigrants. Before we formally begin today's session, I would like to take a moment to offer land acknowledgement, not as a formality, but as a recognition of the land we are meeting on today. This land on which OCASI operates and we are hosting this virtual event is part of the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, an agreement between the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Allied Nations to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This territory is also covered by the Upper Canada Treaties. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. Today, this meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people from across the Turtle Island. We also commit to deepening our understanding of Indigenous history and building relationships of solidarity through our capacity development initiatives. Logistics. A few words about logistics. I would like to walk you through a few logistical instructions to ensure a safer and effective individual and collective participation for all of us. First, recording and interaction. This webinar will be recorded and posted on program's landing page on ocasi.org. Please turn off your camera if you don't want to be recorded. Please keep your audio muted throughout the session. If you need any assistance throughout the session, send a direct chat message to our OCASI support team. Second, chat and Q&A. Use the chat feature to communicate with other participants. Please submit your questions only to the Q&A box. Our tech support team will monitor questions and comments. For live questions, please raise your hand. The facilitator will call on you and then unmute and turn your video if you feel comfortable. Please be considerate and respectful when using chat and posting questions. Third, interpretation. This webinar will be conducted in English. There will be simultaneous French interpretation. To select your language, choose the interpretation option at the bottom of your Zoom screen, where you see the globe icon. A warm welcome to our team of interpreters for this session. Now, moving on to our training session. Please join me in warmly welcoming Ingrid Wilson. Ingrid is a seasoned human resource and organizational development expert with over 30 years of practical experience. She will share more about her background shortly, and you can also find her bio in the chat box. Over to you, Ingrid, for the training.
Thank you, Yasin and team, and welcome everyone. So I want to make sure that we move through the presentation and allow you all time to ask questions as we go along. My sessions are interactive, and today we're talking about HR fundamentals for grassroots organization. So please feel free to drop in, and I do have some role play that we will be speaking about through the process. So this is what we're going to cover today. The role of HR in small and emerging organizations, Ontario employment standards and legal obligations. I do want to state that the presentation is mostly on Ontario, but I have put links and I will refer to other provinces as we go through. And then creating equitable and transparent HR policies, recruitment and onboarding essentials, volunteer management basics, documentation, record keeping, and risk management, tools and templates for immediate use. And there's a small Q&A at the end where I like homework, so I'm going to leave you with some questions to follow up. Okay? Everybody ready? Everybody's got their notes, their water, their breakfast, whatever they're doing. Ready to go? Okay. So I've broken it down into 7 topic areas. So the first area is understanding the role of HR in small and emerging organizations and why HR matters even when you don't have a dedicated HR person. You must understand people impact in your organization to address any risk. Okay? So HR is not just for large organizations. HR covers every people-related decision in your organization, whether it's for paid or volunteer staff. Volunteer staff are also covered by employment laws. So that's important to know as well. In grassroots organizations, the executive director or the board often carry that risk for HR responsibilities with no formal training. So you are already doing HR, even though you don't think you're doing HR. So the goal is to do it more intentionally, consistently, and equitably. And to do that, you need to know the laws. You need to know how you're impacted. So good HR protects your organization legally, supports staff well-being, and strengthens your mission. So your team is your program. How you treat people reflects your organizational values. So the core HR functions you must have, and for the organizations that are funded, the funders will ask you questions about this. They're going to ask if you have core HR functions, not just anti-racism policies and anti-oppression policies. They're going to ask about hiring and onboarding in an equitable manner, any policies and compliance under legal Ontario law or any other province. How do you manage performance? So a lot of time funders have performance KPIs and credentials that they want you to keep updated and report on. So that needs to flow to how you manage program managers, staff, or anybody that is responsible for delivering service. So performance is key. Again, a lot of us use volunteer management. You need to understand that they're legislatively covered as well. How you keep records is important because records can get requested. And in general, HR risk management. So those are the core HR functions. Are there any questions or any thoughts that something's not covered that you wanted to see? I will leave it to the OCASI team to let me know if there's any questions. Okay. So I have a case study. So first case study, when there's no HR and a problem arises. So ABC Community Services is a 5-year-old newcomer service org in Hamilton. 6 part-time staff and 20 volunteers. The executive director is the sole decision maker for all HR. There's no written job descriptions, no employee handbook, no staff contracts, and if there are any agreements, they were drafted informally by a board member years ago. So when a long-term staff member resigns and alleges they were treated unfairly compared to newer hires, the ED has no documentation to respond and the board is alarmed. So has anybody seen or had any scenarios like this? I can't see, Yassine, I can't see if there's any hands. So I'm going to keep going unless you tell me otherwise. So this is what went wrong. No written policies, informal, inconsistent contracts, no documentations of decisions or performance, no complaint or grievance process. If you're in a larger organization, some of you will have unionized employees, so you will have a grievance process. And HR is concentrating in one person with no checks. That means that this person is not, doesn't have the authority to sign off and is not going to anybody else. So your immediate priorities would be to acknowledge the complaint in writing. Always acknowledge the complaint in writing. And what you want to do is be respectful and respond and say, we have received your complaint and we're looking into it. Do not make any judgment. Do not say, we don't believe you. Respond, simply, concisely, we've basically received your complaint. Begin documenting current practices if you haven't got that already, because you will need to make sure that your current practices are documented. Because if this individual goes to human rights or employment standards, that's the first thing that they're going to ask you for. What are your current policies and practices? Engage a legal advisor or HR consultant. There's a lot of HR consultants who will provide volunteer services out there. Look through Charity Village, etc. You can put a call out, get a volunteer HR consultant who's registered through HRPA and can help you through this process, because what you're doing is you're giving them experience as well, and they're helping you. Establish an interim complaint process, noting that you will have to have a proper process in the future, and then review all existing staff contracts. Moving forward, you're going to have to draft an employee handbook. And at the end of our sessions, I've shared with the OCASI team a basic HR manual that you can all use to start lifting off of. So create consistent and written job descriptions. Role descriptions need to be in place. Otherwise, people are going to assume their roles, and there's going to be misinterpretations and assumptions, and that's when you have room for complaints. Develop a board-approved policy manual and policies. Separate HR oversight from daily management, and train the board on their governance role for HR. Any thoughts or questions?
No questions so far.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to speak about Ontario employment standards and legal obligations. So this is what, oh, there's a question. I see a hand up.
We have a hand up. Judith, please go ahead.
Thank you, Martha. Thank you, Ingrid. My question is around, so we do have an HR policy and job descriptions and all that process. However, you mentioned something around training the board on their governance responsibilities on HR. I'm not 100% sure I understand what that is other than the manual. So I don't believe we've done that yet. Can you elaborate a little bit more? Thank you.
Yes. So for best protection, your HR manual should be approved first by the executive director, but also ratified and approved by the board, because some of your HR processes and policies will require board oversight, like code of conduct, code of ethics, anti-Black racism, anti-racism and oppression. Those all can carry grievance or complaint processes that the board is actually responsible if the organization gets sued or filed again. So the board has to know what those policies are, and they have to have oversight. So the fact that you have a manual is great, Judith. Make sure that the board approves it, and your manual should be updated and reviewed at least every 2 years or as legislation changes. A lot of times what I see is small organizations write the policies, and you're going to get policies from us at the end of these sessions, but you need to go back and update it, and you need to make sure that it meets your needs as an organization. Because if you don't have some of the requirements, or you have shelters or other things attached to your organization, your policies are going to need to be customized. So really, really important. That was a great question. So yes, the board has responsibility. Okay, so I'm going to go through Ontario employment standards and legal obligations that every Ontario employer must know, regardless of your organization size. And again, outside of Ontario, you can refer to your province's equivalent legislation. Each province will have an equivalent legislation that is similar. So, but today we're going to focus on Ontario. If somebody has questions about their province, I'm happy to respond to that as well. So here's a chart that you can actually take off and print. These are the current minimum standards that every Ontario employer must meet. In each province, you're going to have similar situations. What I've done here is put it in a chart so you know what you need to do. So this is your checklist. You must understand minimum wage. This is the Ontario minimum wage, and there's a difference in student rates as well. If you are paying below minimum wage, the employee can take you to employment standards in each province. And again, each province is different, but understand here that even if a funder says to you, here's your budget, and you're challenged with how are you going to pay people with the budget, it probably means you can only hire a certain amount of people because you must pay the minimum wage. Hours of work, also critical, maximum 8 hours per day, 48 hours per week. You need a written agreement to exceed 48 hours. And that written agreement is usually can be an email communication staff that overtime is required for a 3-month period and will be working over 48 hours. You should have that documented that staff have agreed to it. Once you get to those agreed hours, even though it's average across different weeks, the employment standards would still look at that. That maximum 8 hours work per day, you must give breaks. So 15-minute breaks every 4 hours and half an hour for lunch. Okay? Overtime pay, again. So you have to pay time and a half of the person's regular hourly rate after 44 hours per week. So verify if any of your roles, however, carry ESA exemption. So some roles are exempt and you don't have to pay overtime, right? But very few in our sector. Most are eligible. And then vacation entitlements, this again is Ontario, 2 weeks at start, 4% pay, and then after 1 year, it goes up 3 weeks, 6% pay, and after 5 years, it depends on what the employer is offering. Okay, but your minimum start 2 weeks vacation. Your statutory holidays must be paid. If they are entitled to, if it falls on a work day, then they have to get a substitute day to be paid. Leaves of absence, I've listed here the legislated leave, so pregnancy, parental, sick, and there's several emergency leaves, bereavement leaves that are now legislated. Some of them are paid and some of them are unpaid. So you need to know which ones are paid and unpaid. Termination notice, also critical. 1 week per year of service. After 5 years of service in Ontario, you have to pay an additional week. I have not noted common law in here, but common law also takes into effect in Ontario and several provinces, and that usually takes into account the employee's level, their years of service, their age, their gender, and all sorts of other things. But right now, these are the basics. A lot of organizations do not give written agreement. Written agreements protect you as an employer. So even if it's a basic agreement that indicates how many hours of how many hours they work, are they working Monday to Friday? Are they working in office? Their salary, and if there's any benefits or no benefits. If there's no benefits, please make sure you add it on. Those basics should be written down in the documents. That will cover you after if an employee leaves and says, well, I had an increase of salary increase at this point and it wasn't documented and the employer forgot to give it to me, but I have an email, you're going to get in trouble. Okay? Written agreements are key, and you need written agreements when you promote people as well. Okay? Any thoughts or questions?
Yes, we have a question by
Yes.
Rasha. What is the difference between termination notice and severance pay?
Okay, so termination notice is anything under severance. So that's considered employment services notice. So 1 week per year of service. That it's called ESA notice, and it's to a maximum of 8 weeks, right? If the employee in Ontario is working more than 5 years and you're departing them, you have to apply severance, which is an additional 1 week per year of service, up to a maximum of 26 weeks. So in essence, if you have an employee who's worked more than 5 years and has worked with the organization, I'm going to say for 20 years, you have to give that employee 20 weeks minimum and up to a maximum of 26 weeks of severance, plus the 8 weeks common. Okay? Another question?
Yes, another question. For employee who work over 15 years, is termination still up to 8 weeks only? What
No.
about severance?
Yes, so an employee who's worked 15 years gets 8-week service for notice, but they get another 15 weeks, 1 week per year of service because they're over 5 years. So they're going to get the 15 weeks plus the 8 weeks as a minimum. Okay?
Okay, thank you. Another question.
Yep.
Can organizations offer lieu time, paid time off in brackets, instead of overtime pay?
Absolutely, but you definitely have to have a policy. You have to have a policy that says that overtime will not be paid. It will be indicated as lieu time, and approved lieu time can be used with approval from the managers. So, and you can give examples for doctor's appointments, if they want to add it onto their vacation, but you need to be very specific about that. And a lot of organizations do that, but you also need to put a maximum on how much lieu time can be accrued. Because what happens if somebody accrues hours and hours and days of lieu time? So that 15-year employee, they're accruing all that lieu time. When they leave, you're going to have to pay out all that lieu time. It doesn't go away. So I would recommend that you max out the lieu time per year. So you say that staff can only keep one week's worth of lieu time per year. So if your full-time staff are working 35 hours per week, you max out 35 hours of lieu time for the year.
Oh,
Otherwise,
great. This generated quite a bit of questions. Next
okay,
question.
yep.
Is pregnancy / parental leave always paid? And if we have a contract employee go on parental leave and then their contract ends, are we legally required to renew the contract while they are on leave?
Okay, so parental leave and pregnancy leave is protected. So for example, even if it's a contract employee and you hire the employee and they're pregnant, you can't terminate the contract. You have to carry the contract through. And pregnancy and parental leave is not paid by you as an employer, it's paid by employment insurance. So the employee has to go and apply for employment insurance to cover that. However, if you have a sub-employment insurance plan that allows you to get a decrease in the employer insurance payments, you will have to pay that sub every time the employee gets paid by EA and from employment insurance. And usually you would set up a process to make sure that the employee sends their employment insurance stub when they get paid. So you issue the sub. Okay. So most of the leaves are actually paid through employment insurance by the government, and that's a good thing. So the employee has to apply for it and they have to qualify for it through employment insurance regulations, which has nothing to do with you as an employer. Okay.
Great, thank you. We have Rupa with her hand up. Rupa, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Yeah, thank you so much. So Ingrid, we are a very, very small group, and we are hiring consultants. So my question is, is there any minimum standards that I have to follow that meets the Ontario employer requirements? I do have written agreements. I got templates, but I don't think I've included public holidays, leaves of absence, vacation, and things like that. It's consultant driven appointments.
Okay, so the consultant appointments. So let me ask you a couple questions, Rupa. So are the consultant appointments are they for a year or more?
For the project duration period.
Okay, that's good. So the project duration period.
Yeah.
And are you paying the person so are they invoicing you or are you paying them directly?
They are invoicing us.
Okay, so that's a true consultant. If they're invoicing you, then the agreement between you and them needs to say that they're responsible for all their taxes, etc., and that they do not get benefits and they're considered an independent consultant and not an employee.
Okay.
The problem I see often is that we hire what I'm going to say contract employees with no benefits. If you are hiring contract employees in Ontario and Quebec and BC, and they hit a year and you are providing them office space, providing them equipment to work, managing their work, and paying them out of payroll, they could be deemed an employee. And if they file with employment standards can come back and say you have to provide equivalent of benefits. You will get assessed for employee CPP and EI, etc. So be careful. I know because we do a lot of contracts that are based on funding and renew every March, etc. Those employees, those individuals are not contractors, they're employees. You have to give them benefits as long as they qualify for your benefits program. So usually the benefits are, you have to have hours of 21 or 24 hours to qualify. So be careful with that 1 year. I've seen employees who've been working with organizations for 20 years in those type of contracts with no benefit. They're employees.
They're employees, okay.
Okay.
Okay, Ingrid, one more, may I? If there is. What about tax? What is the tax payment requirement for
So this individual should have their own GST number, HST number, and they should have it at the bottom of their invoice. If they don't, and which is fine because they're a consultant, your agreement has to say that they are responsible for their taxes as an independent consultant.
Yeah, that's what we have mentioned and some of them are students, some of them are international students, so you may not have. Okay, thank you so much, Ingrid. Thanks a lot.
No problem.
Next question.
A lot of questions.
We got a lot of questions, I tell you. Does part-time employees get paid pregnancy leave?
It depends how many hours they qualify for. So that's under employment insurance. So once they apply for employment insurance, depending on the area they live in and how many insurable hours they've earned, employment insurance will tell them if they qualify, right? And if you have a sub-plan that covers regular part-time employees, and I would specify regular part-time employees who work for you all the time, then you would top up on the employment insurance qualifications. So.
Great. We'll take another question and then we'll continue with presentation and then we'll continue with questions after all.
Yes.
Do we put an employee back on probation if we extend their contract from part-time to full-time?
Oh, I don't like this one. Okay. That probation is tricky. So if the employee is already working with you and they pass their 3-month probation, right? 3 months is better than 6, but once they pass their 3 months probation and you make a decision to hire them now into a full-time role, you're in essence promoting them. You're in essence saying that this person has performed well enough to become a full-time employee. So my question would be, why would you put them back on probation? Right? And that's the challenge. You can put them on probation because if it's a new role, but if you're hiring somebody from part-time into full-time into the same role, you have to be careful about that probation. Okay? And you don't get away if somebody gets into probation and starts having issues, whether it's on personal matters or not, you still owe the employee under employment standards. Even during probation, 3 months, if you terminate somebody during that time, you still owe them 1 week's worth of pay based on employment standards. So you still have to pay employment standards, and they can still say that it was probation, but you didn't help me learn. Okay? I think Jenny had a question.
Jenny, yes. Can you unmute yourself, please?
The probation question is actually my question. I just want to know if we was going to add a little bit more responsibility onto the new full-time contract, do we need to put that person back onto probation?
So sorry, Jenny, you just cut out. If the person is, can you repeat what you said?
Hi, sorry. The probation question is my questions.
Okay.
If we are going to change the contract and a little bit more responsibility into that person's portfolio, do we need to put that person back on probation?
So in essence, you're changing the role. So you're adding new responsibility. It's totally up to you as an employer if in that case you would put them back under probation. But if it means that putting them back on probation means that you're not giving them benefit, that would be a challenge. Because if you're going to recognize their service for the part-time, which usually happens, you would normally put them on benefits. You wouldn't ask them to wait for another 3 months. So again, it's an organizational decision, but you can put them on probation because it's more responsibilities. But again, what you're describing to me is if you're giving somebody more responsibilities, you are indicating that they performed well. So why would you put them on probation? That would be the question.
Yeah, I think the job nature is 80% the same and a little bit 20%. So we don't know if we should put that person back.
If it's 80% the same, I wouldn't put them on probation again.
All right, thank you.
Okay, no problem.
We have another question which relates to what you presented. Do the minimum standards for leave of absence apply uniformly for employees working for less than 1 year and working for 1 year and greater?
It applies to every employee. Day one. Every employee. So day one they're covered by minimum employment standards. Okay. I'm going to move forward because we have a couple more scenarios and then we can add some of the questions at the end. Okay. So here's additional legal obligations for all Ontario employers. You have similar obligations in other provinces. So prohibits discrimination and harassment in employment on 17 grounds. Harassment also falls under health and safety. So you can have a claim against you under health and safety under the harassment or violence codes and tied to one of these 17 grounds. It applies to all employers, no minimum number of employees. And as I said before, every employee day one is covered by Ontario Human Rights Code. You have a duty to accommodate employees to the point of undue hardship. So for disability or religious observations, you have a duty to accommodate unless it's going to be undue hardship, which is an expense, or you have to change something structurally in your building to accommodate somebody that you cannot afford. You have to be able to prove that, so it has to be documented. Harassment or poison work environment is a violation in Ontario and in BC. In BC, they refer to psychological safety under the code. Reprisal against someone who raises a complaint is also prohibited. And then accessibility for Ontarians with disability, AODA, has to be in place for all organizations with one employee or more. Okay? Organizations with 20 employees need to have a written plan, but you need to be aware of the accessibility, the AODA. So you need communications, all that around it. And your best bet is to go to the labor sites. They have free resources that you can draw down on, print off. If you're in a work environment where people are actually working in the environment and not remotely, you need to have a spot where these are printed or accessed on your intranet. Okay? So I have another case study. So minimum wage misclassification. So ABC Settlements Board has been paying 2 part-time program employees, program staff as independent contractors for 2 years, right? To avoid paying deductions. So that would be CPP, EI, or benefit. Both staff works fixed hours. So 35 hours a week or 22 hours a week. So you are paying them fixed hours. So these would be now called regular part-time employees. They're working a regular schedule. They're following an organization set schedule, use organizational equipment, right? So a staff member, one of these members consults a legal clinic and learns they're likely qualified as employee and is an employee under Ontario law. The organization now faces potential back payment, statutory holiday pay, vacation pay, because remember, when somebody starts working, they're immediately, for under 1 year, it's 2 weeks of accrued vacation. And ESA, employment standards, entitlement, plus Ministry of Labor liability. So you must be able to pass the employee versus contractor test. So in Ontario, it's a multi-factor test. Are you in control of the employee's work? Do you own their tools that they're using? Is there financial risk? So liability, you're paying for the employees, salary, etc. When all of that integrates, you are probably paying an employee. So you have to get it right from the start. So you have to make sure that the agreement is specific. And if you're paying a contractor or a consultant, it indicates that, and it's a fixed term. The term ends for the contractor. It doesn't just keep repeating. Misclassification is common in non-for-profit sector, but in other sectors too. So again, have an HR advisor look at your contract, because retroactive liability is real. If it's misclassified, the Ministry of Labor can order back pay under ESA entitlement. So all those entitlements I just talked about, and CRA and employment insurance will come, they can do an audit and come back for unpaid CPP and EI remittances. And in that case, you'd be responsible for paying the employer portion and the employee portion. Okay? So this is really important because we use a lot of contracts in non-for-profit. Any other questions related to this?
We have a couple of more questions, but I think give me 1 second.
Okay.
Okay. Can you extend probation if you're still unsure about employee performance?
Okay. You need to be very specific. I don't like extending probation because why would you keep the employee if they're not working out? What you're doing when you're extending probation is you're extending yourself to more termination pay. You're opening yourself up. So in the first 3 months, unless it's cyclical requirements, I would say you have to have a very strong onboarding plan to make sure you bring the employee up to speed, right? But if you're gonna extend probation, it has to be very specific and you can't just keep extending probation. Again, you're gonna draw termination pay and ESA requirements. So,
Okay.
Marta?
I'm going to ask another question.
Okay.
For the vacation pay, if a part-time employee is more than 1 year of service with the employer, are they entitled for 6% or is there any different calculation?
Yeah, so in Ontario, it's 4% until they reach 3 years under employment standards, unless you have a better vacation policy or a union policy that says more. But they would be titled to the 4%. Part-time employees, you would usually accrue it on each pay versus giving them paid time off. So it depends on your structure.
Thank you. If a worker qualifies as an employee but wants to be qualified as an independent contractor, can we honor the worker's request to do? We have to legally treat them as an employee.
Yeah, so organization rules first. You need to protect the organization to take care of the employees and the services and clients we provide. So if they were an employee and they've decided that they want to be an independent contractor, but they're working under the same rules, your equipment, your control, it doesn't matter what they say, they're not an independent contractor, right? They would have to, in that case, for safety purposes, right? I would say that would have to be a termination. You would need to terminate them and pay out any accrued vacation, sever ties under the previous agreement as an employee. And I would ask that person to prove they're an independent contractor. So do they have a GST number? And it would have to definitely say in the agreement that they're responsible for their taxes. So you need to make sure that it's not just employees saying they need to be an independent contractor. Is that the right thing for your organization is what you need to make sure of. Because you could be getting into risk and liability.
Okay, we have a very interesting question, Ingrid.
Okay. Okay.
If an employee was accommodated by being allowed to bring their emotional support or service animal to work, however, they work in the food industry and their service animal is not well kept and is a hazard to the work, where do we land with duty to accommodate?
So your duty to accommodate does not override your requirement to provide a safe environment and ensure that you're passing all the laws for the regulations for food security. So you would have to give that employee notice that the accommodation can only continue under these terms, right? And I would say somebody that has a guide dog is probably should not be working in a food security area, right? So going forward, you need to make sure when you're looking at accommodations that the organization can accommodate from upfront. So if somebody says, I need to be accommodated this way, and it comes up in hiring or it comes up after, you would have to say to the person in writing that you cannot accommodate that because of the safety requirements around food, right? So now that the person is in place and you've accommodated for them for so long, you will have to address it with them that we will have to either transfer you to another space or make different accommodations or requirements, because we cannot have the guide dog in food area. Okay, that one's a first for me. That's interesting.
Yes,
that was good.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay, that's it for questions for now.
Okay, so let's keep moving forward. So topic 3, creating equitable and transparent HR policies. And in the guide, the HR guide that I've given you, I talk about these as well. So building a policy foundation that reflects your values and legal obligations is key, right? Putting things in writing is really important, because it always has a place for you to go to protect yourself as an organization, as long as you keep updating your policies, right? So I have a list of policies here that are absolutely required, right? So a lot of funders are going to ask for these in your funding agreements, but under ESA standards, they're actually looking for these as well. So a code of conduct is required, so it sets standards of behaviors and expectations of how staff, volunteers, and board members should be representing the organization. Employees, volunteers, and board members are carrying your brand. So you need to set the code of conduct. There must be an anti-harassment and anti-discrimination policy required. It's required under Ontario Human Rights Code. And it must include a complaint process, visible complaint process. Conflicts of interest, that protects the organization, particularly with funding and procurement, because the funders are going to need to ensure that they're going to look to see if you're doing RFPs for procurement and all that kind of stuff. So conflict of interest needs to be upfront. Confidentiality and privacy policy. So how are you storing and protecting staff? How are you storing data? How are you storing donor data? How are you storing staff benefit and personal information is key. Leave of absence policy. So we've talked a lot about outlining of the ESA statutory leave. Of any organizational leave must be in writing. That's also under employment standards. Health and safety, Ontario Health and Safety, it's required. So you need to have a health and safety policy. If somebody complains about harassment, violence, or one of your employees or a client complains under health and safety, Ontario Occupational Health and Employment Standards have inspectors that will come out. They have field inspectors that will come out if there's a complaint. They used to come out for arbitrary situations, but they're under-resourced. But if an employee or a client complains, even if it's anonymous and it indicates a potential breach, they will come to your organization. And you must have all of these things that are required under health and safety posted and employment standards, or a link to it on the internet, on your internet where the employees can find it. Performance management and social media and technology policies are not required, but they are best practice and good governance. So performance management, so setting check-ins around your funding KPIs and requirements are key, because you probably need to report on them, and the funders will ask about it. So you don't want a situation where the funder changes KPIs and then you have to go back to the employees and say, you now have to report on these KPIs. And the employee says, why am I getting changes to my KPIs and I'm not doing them? Because you are implementing performance management that wasn't there before. So if you have a performance management tool, a written policy that says KPIs for funders are embedded, then it's hard for that argument to come into play. Social media and technology use, again, another best practice, because you want to protect the organization's reputation and client confidentiality in digital spaces. So you need to make sure that the employees are aware of what they can and cannot do on your systems. You own them, you own the systems, and you can monitor the systems. But you need to have a policy that's telling employees that you are monitoring the systems. Okay? So these are essential policies, and I'm pretty sure I put most of these in the guide. So what I did is I created basic templates that you can all start, put your organization name at the top, a gift from OCASI and Debs. So make sure that's at the top, your policy, but you need to make sure that it applies to your organization. Don't just take it and say, okay, this is my policy. Okay? Any thoughts, Marta? Actually, I would like to take a poll. Who has these policies? Does anybody have these policies? Does anybody have 100% of these policies? Hands up. Rupa, okay. Does anybody have at least the required policies? Okay, Marta, are the hands going up? I can't see.
Yes, there are a lot of hands going up, and there are a lot of
Good.
thumbs up. Yes, going up.
Okay. If you don't have these policies, use the guide. I think after my next session on July 9th, the guide will be out. So, okay. So moving beyond having a policy to policies that work for everyone and your organization. So it must be equitable by design. So policies acknowledge that people face different barriers. So equity means that you're going to have to address the nuances for more people and cultures within your walls, right? You can't assume that everybody's equal. So accommodation needs to be built in as a norm. Accommodation and accessibility. You should start with that. It's not an exception. Plain language. Avoid legal jargons that may create barriers. All of us do not speak the same language. All of us do not have the same interpretations. It needs to be available in accessible format. So intranet, mobile, as many opportunities as you can so that people can find it, and in multiple languages if possible. Reviewed regularly with staff input, not just created top down. So don't just create a policy and put it on the website and not send it out. Notify staff that you're putting a policy in place. I love FAQs. I always do FAQs so that the staff understand what's changed in the policy, what's expected from them. The FAQs will help, especially if you're a small organization and you can't go out and train staff immediately. You apply the FAQs and it will tell them this is what you need to know, right? It needs to be a transparent process. All staff receive the policy handbook on day one when they join the organization or have access to it. Where can I find this? Some organizations will actually give you first 3 hours of the day to sit down and review policies, and that's fine. All decisions should be documented and applied consistently and transparently. Complaint processes need to be clear. Under employment standards and health and safety, they must be clear, right? Staff know who to go to and what to expect when they raise a concern. So are they going to HR? Are they going to executive director? What's the process? And if you get a complaint, please ensure that you respond in writing. Policies must be revisited when circumstances happen, when laws change or when needs change, and at least annually or every 2 years, right? And for grassroots context, acknowledge that there's a dual role of many staff. So some are doing frontline and admin all at the same time in a policy. Address power dynamics unique to small, close-knit teams, right? So you may have promoted somebody to manager from within the same team. So that's a different nuance. That person is now going to have to learn how to manage people equitably versus being one of the team members. Include volunteers in the scope of your code of conduct. They are carrying your brand. They must sign off your code of conduct and your code of ethics. Reflect your organization values, not just legal minimums. If you have a vision and values, I always like to build them into the organization policies. And share policies with the board because they share fiduciary accountability for specific policies. But when you change policies, if somebody files a complaint, it can go up to board level and the board has fiduciary responsibility, right? And I hope you all have director and emissions insurance for your board members because you need to have it, right? And Rupa, to your independent consultants or contractors, when I act as an independent contractor, I actually carry professional insurance up to $1 million. And some employers will ask for more. That's another protection for you. So because I'm regulated under Human Resources Professional Association, I am actually required to carry professional insurance, which they provide, and I have to pay for because I'm providing services in that way. If I work as an employee, then I don't have to have that because the employee covers me. But you should, if anybody approaches you and says they're a consultant or independent contractor, for additional layer of protection, ask them for professional insurance. Yeah, yeah. Even if they don't have a GST number, you want to make sure, because if you're giving them access to your system, your documents, etc. And sometimes funders will ask that about your contractors. Okay. Oh, Rupa, you're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry, Ingrid. Thank you so much. These are such valuable insights and information.
I hope I'm not scaring everybody though, but you need these.
Yeah. Oh, of course. These are very, very valuable. We are working with students. How do I really don't know how I can.
So are the students coming from a university?
Yes, university, college. Yes, we have two in Thunder Bay.
Yeah, so the universities are supposed to be covering their insurance. Ask the universities for. So usually when they're coming from a university, there's an agreement with the university. You need to make sure who's covering their health and safety and their other insurance. Because I've noticed, I teach as a professor at Humber College, and I noticed a flip where the colleges are pushing for the employers to carry that insurance. You need to push back.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Ingrid. I'll explore.
No problem.
Thank you.
Ingrid, we have a question.
Yes.
Is there a specific process that is required to have for complaints? We have a policy process for it already, although we were told that we should have a better one.
I mean, you need to start with something basic, and you should have a complaint process attached to. You should have a complaint process in general. You should have a complaint process attached to a health and safety policy. You should have a specific complaint process attached to anti-racism and oppression policies. It may be that it still roots to the same people, but for added protection, they need to be embedded in the policies. A lot of times we write policies and we separate a procedure, or the complaint procedure is further down in the policy. Further down in the handbook, people are not going to look that. For me, best practice, and what I tell all organizations, you need to have a complaint policy, complaint procedure and procedures built into each policy. And if you don't have that, attach an FAQ. This is where you go. This is who you need to speak to. It will definitely help you.
And the last question then for this section, what is your take, Ingrid, with the organization where all board members are related to the executive director and the HR, what would you advise the
Oi,
employees?
oi. Marta, okay. Well, that's very challenging, right? And in that situation, I'm going to tell you, if the HR person is under the Human Resources Professional Association of Ontario, and I sit on one of the board committees there, we are regulated. So you have to be careful not to be in any conflict of interest or in any perceived conflict of interest. But not every HR professional is regulated. Board members also have a fiduciary responsibility that should be to protect the organization. So if you're in an organization that cares about all of what I said, then you're going to see it in the policies and you're going to see it in the actions. If that organization continues to have conflicts of interest, etc., and it's impacting work and people, I'm just going to say some employees are going to have to make personal decisions. It's what I'm going to say. Okay? Because that's a whole can of conflict there. And remember, perception creates conflict. If you don't have policies structured in such a way that people know what's happening and don't make assumptions, then that's when you get into more conflict. Okay,
Yes,
that's a hard one. I'm going to have to keep that one for future reference.
Yes, this situation resonated with somebody else at the same time in the group. So yeah, thank you. Moving on.
Okay. So I have another example. So there's a harassment complaint and there's no policy in place. So ABC Cultural Support has 8 staff and 15 volunteers. A volunteer coordinator received a complaint from a program. Sorry. Moving on. Right. Okay. Program assistant about repeated comments from a colleague about their accent and cultural background. The ED is unsure how to proceed. There's no harassment policy, so no written policy, no complaint form, because sometimes you want to attach a complaint form. You want to have an intake form that allows people to actually put in their complaints and details. That is definitely a great tool to have. No designated person to investigate. The staff member feels unheard and is considering resigning. Again, in this situation, I would say acknowledge immediately in writing, right? So you need to respond quickly. So you should try and respond within the first couple of days. Silence communicates that the complaint doesn't matter, and this person could go to employment standards immediately because it's free. If you have a clear policy who defines to investigate, then go ahead with that. If you do not, you need to write one. But what you need to know is you need to start investigating the process. It needs to be confidential, who you keep in that circle, and you need to document everything. So you need to investigate fairly, ensure both parties are interviewed separately with the same questions, document your information, and whoever is investigating must be impartial. It can't be somebody named in the process, and it's often an external HR advisor. If you're using an external HR advisor, make sure that they're trained in workplace investigations. All of us in HR are not trained in workplace investigation. And Human Resources Association of Ontario, here's my hint for the day. If you go on their site, they actually have a guide for investigation that you can just draw down and best practices, right? Take actions and follow up. So you need to follow up in writing and let the person know that you have investigated and addressed it. You don't want to provide a lot of details, but you will say that this has been investigated, your claim has been substantiated, and we're addressing it this way through training, etc. Okay? So you have and harassment complaints, you need to work through them as quickly as possible. If they fester, that's when it blows up, and again, the person can go to employment standards, right? As well. And some harassment falls under the health and safety code. They can also go to health and safety and complain as well. Any thoughts about this? Because I know this happens all the time. I see a question. Wissam, go ahead.
Yeah. First, thank you so much for the very valuable information. My question regarding the take action and follow up. Okay. So up to what extent we can let the person who filed the complaint, what are like, not the process, but what action been taken. So like we would say like, okay, we applied, we investigate, but are we allowed to say that like, not firing, but like what is the actual action that being taken? We shouldn't, yeah, but up to what extent we can say that?
You want to protect the privacy of all the
Yes.
people in the situation, especially if the person is still the person that was complained about is still working for the organization. You want to make sure that whatever measures you're taking for that person, whether it's training, etc., is kept confidential and private. So in most cases, in an organization and a small organization, I would immediately do some kind of workplace harassment training for everybody, right? And then you can put that in your document that, we have found that the claim has been partially substantiated, and under the circumstances as an organization, we feel that it's in our best interest to train all staff on workplace harassment, and we've taken other measures to deal with this, right? If the person is reporting to that person, then you're going to have a challenge, because then a lot of times I see workplace harassment claims come up because of performance. The manager tells an employee you're not working well, but there's been no previous performance feedback, and the person immediately files a harassment claim. You're going to have to be more specific in that documentation. You're going to have to say to the person who filed the claim that this was not substantiated and this is a management responsibility for performance management. We will work with you on that, right? So that you can move back to the manager-employee relationship. So it depends on the situation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Rupa.
Great. We are again a very small organization, and it's volunteer driven. What is, to what extent are we obligated to protect our board members? Like there is a board member who has issues with some volunteer, and she has come to us saying that if this volunteer is coming for any of our activities, she has objections. She has raised objections. When we asked for evidence, she just said, I have something with regards to legal requirement that this volunteer has to be, she has to be away from this volunteer. Now, that is not really our mandate, because we are an inclusive, this is one-on-one kind of a situation, but
So she may have a restraining order against the individual.
Yeah, but when we asked for evidence or proof of, some written something to go by, and not just verbal, she didn't have anything to share. But we're still obligated because she's a board member. She's in the council.
Yeah, so you are obligated to investigate. You need to put it in writing that you have investigated and you've requested the proof. And at this time, you can't substantiate the situation. So you're moving forward under the organizational requirements because this volunteer may be critical to certain situations, right? And that's probably the best you can do under the circumstances. Yeah.
Thank you again. Thanks a lot, Ingrid.
No problem. Did I see somebody else put their hand up or no? Marcia, we're good to go?
We're good to go. Thank you.
Okay, topic 4, recruitment and onboarding essentials. So fair, welcoming practices for small teams for serving newcomer communities is required. So these are I've given you 6 steps to equitable hiring process. Make sure you define the role. It's very challenging if you're interviewing somebody for a role, they accept the role and they come in and the role is not what they interviewed for. That's one issue. Focus on skills and competencies, not degrees. Canadian experience as of January 1st, 2026 is legal. You cannot ask for Canadian experience. Thankfully, right? Make sure that every requirement on the role is truly necessary, right? You have to indicate the salary or hourly rate range on the role description and job posting. It is now a requirement by law. You have to indicate if you are using AI tools to screen resumes by law. Post widely, especially if we're in non-profits, use your community networks, Charity Village, settlement.org. You want to make sure that you reach as many candidates as possible. So if somebody says it wasn't an equitable process, you know that you've gone out broadly. Anonymous resume screening. You know, sometimes you want to, in a situation where you know there's a manager who's discounting people from certain cultures, you want to remove names, addresses, all that kind of stuff that would create bias, and have a hiring panel through the process. Structured interviews, so each candidate is getting the same questions, and you're using a rubrics, right, to make sure that you're rating each candidate at the end of their process. Also take notes, because sometimes the rubrics will tell you one thing, but when you get into once the panel gets together at the end, having those conversations about how people interviewed, you know, do you want to give somebody who's younger and newer to the industry a better chance? You need to have those nuanced conversations. So it's not just about the scores. And that's why you need a diverse interview panel. So include at least 2 people in the interview, the hiring manager, HR, and maybe another manager or peer who the person would interact with all the time. And bringing people with lived experience and relevant experiences in the communities that the organization is serving, right? You should always do references and background checks. If you're required, some funders do criminal record checks and vulnerable checks, you need to do them. I notice a lot of times people will rush to hire, so you make the offer predicated on getting positive references or vulnerable checks. You have to be careful with that, because people are not always truthful on references, because they don't want to get in trouble, because you can get sued for giving bad references. So make sure you do all those checks as quickly as possible. A lot of times nowadays, I've seen situations where you give the person a chance, you hire, you're waiting for this, and you retract the offer. You need to make sure that that's covered in the offer letter. If you don't have a statement indicating that the offer will be retracted, if these don't happen, the person could sue you as well. Okay? Any thoughts about this? Okay. So a strong onboarding process sets people up to succeed. So organizations with structured onboarding improves new hire retention by up to 82% and productivity by over 70%. So if you are hiring somebody or hiring a group of people and the hiring manager is away the week the people start, should you start the people though that week? Yes or no? Thumbs up for yes. Thumbs down for no. Marta, I can't see.
We haven't had any thumbs up or thumbs down yet.
Okay. Okay. So listen, if you're hiring people and the hiring manager is not going to be around for the first day of work, you shouldn't start the person that day. Okay? Because it doesn't fit well with the person. If the person that they're going to work with hasn't shown up the first day, it's not showing value. So before day one, make sure that there's a signed offer letter and employment contract. Both parties need to sign. Send a welcome email, organizational overview. So you need to show up at this time. This is how you access the building, all of that. Thank you, Rupa. Assign an onboarding peer mentor. It always helps to have a peer mentor. Confirm schedule, dress code, and first day plan. Let me tell you, dress code is key because I love to wear my dress jeans. And that's the first thing I'm going to ask when I go to an organization. Can I wear my dress jeans with a jacket or a sweater? You want to make sure that all of those things are covered. And then the first week, introduce to the team, walk through the organization mission, programs, and or culture. If you can afford to bring in lunch, bring in sandwiches. If you're in office, if not, do a Zoom call and introduce everybody and make sure everybody brings their lunch or whatever, and just make it an effective and positive environment for the person's first week. Clarify roles expectations, which you want to do for the first 30, 60, and 90 days. Tour of office and any key contacts if you have an office. And then for the first 30 to 90 days, you want to do bi-weekly one-by-one check-ins with the supervisor, role-specific training and skill development, feedback on initial work, because this is your probation period, right? Make sure you have a formal 90-day performance check-in. So if you have a probation period, you need to do a check-in. The person can't find out at the end of the 3 months that they're not making their requirements. That needs to happen. And confirm permanent employee status if applicable. So if you're hiring somebody who needs to first prove that they're working in Canada under for the organization, this is when you would have that check-in. Okay? Any questions? Okay.
No questions.
Here's another. Okay. No questions? No? Okay.
No.
Okay, so here's another case example. Hiring bias and the cost of an unstructured process. ABC Pathways, a settlement services organization in Mississauga, hires a new case manager. The hiring panel selects a candidate with a familiar name and Canadian university degree over a equally qualified candidate who graduated from a university outside of Canada and whose first language is not English. There was no scoring rubric used. The decision was made in a hallway conversation after interviews. 2 months later, the passed over candidate contacts the organization's funders, raising equity concerns. So the person who didn't get the role complained to the funder about your hiring process. And when I say here, the hiring panel selected a candidate with a familiar name. What I mean is a name familiar in their culture, right? So here's a list of discussion points that you can look at. So what biases may have been at play? It's familiarity, affinity biases, credential biases. They're looking for Canadian experience. We cannot do that anymore. Linguistic bias. And so maybe the person has an accent, that is fine. Can the person do the job is what's key. What would a structured process have prevented? So you would have had a scoring rubric, document decision-making, and it would make it harder for informal biases to drive the outcome. And when the funder comes to look at your files, you have that rubric. How does this affect newcomer community? So when organizations serving newcomers don't model equitable hiring, that impacts your brand. Word gets around. It's a credibility issue. What should the organization do now? So acknowledge the concerns in writing. So if the funder comes, acknowledge it. Review the hiring file. I would definitely say consult HR and legal and commit to implementing structured hiring before the next recruitment. And more than likely, the funder is going to want a update on what happened.
There is a question.
Yep.
Related. Can a manager be part of the interview panel if she knows the candidate from previous employment who was her subordinate and hiring as her subordinate again in the new workplace?
So that is a working relationship, not a personal relationship. And normally that would be fine. But the manager must declare upfront if they referred the employee. If they referred the employee, then the hiring panel must agree to have the manager in the interview. Personally, if I were in that situation, I would not sit in the interview. Right? I would observe, but not ask questions, or I wouldn't be in the interview at all. But that's a decision that the organization can make. So that is a work relationship versus a personal. If it's personal and the manager has referred the employee, then the manager should definitely not be in the interview.
Great, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marta. So volunteer management basics. So volunteers are invaluable and they deserve structure, clarity, and clear, just like employees do. So volunteers are not covered by employment standards, but they are protected under the Human Rights Code and Ontario Health and Safety. So they are legislatively covered as well. So never use volunteers to replace paid employment, okay? Written volunteer agreements need to be foundational. So just like you have employment contracts, you need to have a volunteer agreement, which specifies you're a volunteer, these are your hours, you don't get benefits, because you need to document that you're hiring a volunteer and this was not a paid role. Clear role descriptions with time commitments, designated supervisor or volunteer coordinator, structured orientation before starting any work, and scope. Does it require a criminal record, vulnerable check, same as before? You still need to do engagement and recognition, regular one-on-one check-ins or group check-ins, provide feedback, not necessarily performance conversations, but provide feedback because you want to make sure that your volunteer is doing what they're supposed to be doing. Acknowledge contributions, that's always valued, and create pathways. So a volunteer could eventually become paid staff, right? Involve volunteers in org events and decisions where appropriate. Confirm, so risk and risk management, confirm your liability insurance covers volunteers. You're usually carrying general liability insurance for your building and other general insurance. You need to make sure it doesn't just cover your employees. It needs to cover your volunteers and your board, especially if they're in the facilities or operating under the brand. They must be covered. Okay? Because if a volunteer goes out to represent the organization and has a car accident or has an accident at an event, they need to be covered by insurance. There needs to be an incident reporting process accessible to the volunteers as well for complaints, etc. You need to clear off boarding processes when a volunteer leaves or is removed. So what are the departure policies for departing staff and departing volunteers need to be clear. So do they have to hand in laptops? Do you have to terminate them on email? Same kind of processes. Document all agreements and ensure volunteer conduct falls under your code of conduct. Again, volunteers are carrying the brand. Okay, so case example. So ABC Newcomer Services relies heavily on long-term volunteer Amara, who has been with the organization for 3 years. Amara works 25 hours per week, follows a set schedule, has her own office key and email, and has gradually taken on supervisory duties over newer volunteers. The organization considers her a senior volunteer. After conflict with management, Amara consults a legal clinic which advises her that she may be classified as an employee under Ontario law and entitled to 3 years of back ESA entitlement. So that would benefits all sorts of things. So the risk here with a volunteer is when you ask a volunteer to take on supervisory or other responsibilities that could be deemed as employment responsibilities. They work regular hours. So she works 25 hours a week, follows a set schedule. So she's coming in at the same time every week and is integrated into the operations. Has her own key, has her own office key and email address. Then you are skirting the line as a potential employee, right? So Ontario courts and tribunals in your provinces will make decisions about that and may deem that person as an employee. So back pay for vacation, the 4%, public holidays and termination notice, so the 8 weeks could be owed. So this is a growing risk. You have to be careful with volunteers. Volunteers normally have more of the clock days of work. They're only working 1 or 2 days a week. They're working, they could be working set days, but maybe 3 hours each day. When somebody's working 25 hours a week for 3 years straight and now has supervisory duties, that's definitely a challenge. So for preventing these challenges, regularly review the scope and hours of all volunteer roles. Avoid assigning supervisory or management duties to volunteers. I've often heard team leads, but you need to make sure they're not responsible for performance of staff or anything that could be deemed management. If a volunteer is performing employee level work, you need to hire them, right? And keep volunteer agreements specific and time limited and purpose driven. So what you can do now is review all current volunteer roles against your employee and contractor test. Update volunteer agreements to clearly reflect non-employment status. Seek HR or legal advice for any long-term, high-hours volunteer relationships and establish a maximum hour guideline for volunteer roles. I see a question. Go ahead.
Please unmute yourself. Yes, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ingrid.
No problem.
Yeah, my name is Mr. Machichi. I'm coming from PLDC. Just I need to understand well about volunteering because I don't know exactly how many hours these people are supposed to work in the organization to avoid any other kind of situation like this. That is first. But secondly, I don't know exactly the kind of contract we need to give to them when you are working with them in the organization. Thank you so much for your clarification.
Okay, so it's not so much how many hours they're working, it's how many regular hours they're working. So for example, the difference with this individual is they're working 25 hours per week for 3 years straight, right? If you're looking at volunteers, they should be working ad hoc hours or specific 4 hours, 2 days a week. If you have somebody like this person here is actually in a volunteer management employee role. That's what you're seeing. This person has responsibilities that you need to pay for, but you haven't been able to afford to pay for, so you call them a volunteer. So you need to look at the organizational requirements and why you have volunteers, right? So if you're getting volunteers for event help out, you're getting volunteers to help with assist with training, that's fine. But if you have volunteers that in essence, you have to ask the question, should this be an employee? But I can't hire this person as an employee because I don't have any funds. You can't just hire them as a volunteer. You have to be careful with that because that's what employment standards will say. You're just calling them a volunteer because you can't afford to pay them as an employee, and they're going to first force you to pay. The volunteer agreements are very different. It says you're a volunteer and you work rotating hours or ad hoc hours for a period of up to 3 months. If you are an ad hoc volunteer and you're coming in for 3 years in a row, but working 6 hours a week, that's a volunteer. And you would specify that in the agreement. So the volunteer agreement looks very, very different. And you'd specify that you're volunteering on events, etc. So they don't have a broader scope of responsibility. And you have to be careful with that. In Quebec and other areas, BC, they have very strong laws. They will deem that you very quickly that this is an employee. I think Quebec is, if you have a volunteer or a contractor for more than 2 years, automatically it's an employee. They won't budge. Okay, so I hope that helped. Any other questions, Marta?
Yes. Occasional volunteers need to be covered under the insurance policy?
All employees and volunteers. Your insurance policy needs to state that anybody within your walls who is covered. So board members, students, and volunteers, right? They're carrying out the work of the organization. The only ones that would not be covered is students coming from universities or et cetera, that Rupa and I were talking about earlier, because they should be covered under the university's insurance policy. But because universities know that most organizations are carrying insurance for volunteers, they're trying to shift it back. So yeah, you all need to check your policies. You're carrying out your brand and your work, they need to be covered.
Thank you. And then there is a question, and I will let Yorit to elaborate, but mainly her question is, what is a reasonable time limited volunteer agreement? Is 1 year reasonable?
1 year is reasonable if you are very specific as to what they're volunteering for, right? You want to be careful that it's not really a contract position that could be paid. So again, is this a volunteer for 1 year period because you can't afford an employee? Usually you don't restrict a volunteer. You give them a volunteer agreement and say you're a volunteer of the organization, and you agree that we can call you in for ad hoc assistance for this, that, and that throughout the year. That's what a volunteer agreement would say. If you are bringing somebody as a volunteer to specifically carry out duties and responsibilities of the organization, that could be an employee.
Thank you. Yorit, do you want to elaborate a little bit more, or do you have a second part of the question? Go ahead.
Okay.
Yes, please. Thank you. So we have two very specific type of volunteers. One is we have virtual tutoring program where volunteers would be trained and onboarded, and they would take on 1 to 2 students to volunteer 1 hour per week virtually. So it's not ad hoc, it's consistent. And then the second set of volunteers that we have is our For Children's program, where we have a biweekly program where they come in and actually carry out, the learn through play sessions, and we supervise them. And so we have about, anywhere between 6 to 10 volunteers that whoever is available that particular Saturday would come in. And so it's regular hours in a way, like yes, it's shifts, but it's regular hours. And typically we ask them if they're available for at least 4 months, because we are investing in their recruitments and all of that stuff, onboarding them and training them. And so we don't specifically say you're in for a year, but we just set out the tasks and code of conduct, etc., in the agreement. So I'm wondering if that still fits or it needs to be ad hoc.
No, that's volunteer. So you're talking about mentorship programs and so you just need to make sure that your agreements say that it's for mentorship support and volunteer mentorship support, and it's for ad hoc. I mean, even though they're coming in on Saturdays and do it for a period of 3 months, you could have one of those 10 volunteers coming in or going to a pool of mentors for the mentees. So that's okay. You just need to specify that they're coming in as mentors and volunteers through the program. So that's totally fine.
Thank you. Thank you. Just doing a quick time check. Is that we are at 11:38, Ingrid?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. Whipping through. So topic 6, documentation, record keeping, and risk management. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. You need to protect your organization. You need to write it down. So here I've got records. I won't go through all of them, but what I've said here is these are the years that you need to keep records. You notice volunteer records need to be kept for a minimum of 2 years, right? So you should keep this information. And again, you'll have this chart to look at. Identifying and managing risks that come with people. So common HR risk, misclassifying employees, no written contracts, informal inconsistent performance, all the things we've talked about, breaching client and staff confidentiality, board members overstepping into operational HR decisions, all risk reductions, have written policies, consistent application of policy, do an annual review of employment standards, have at least one board member review HR decisions before acting. If not a board, it needs to be a senior person above HR. Carry adequate directors' insurance, liability insurance, know your escalation pathway for complaint, and treat an HR consultation as prevention, not just crisis response. So if you have HR consultants who can volunteer with you, perfect. I'm gonna go through this case example. So wrongful dismissal without documentation. So ABC Wellness terminated a long-term program coordinator after escalating performance issues. The ED spoke informally to the employees several times, but never documented their conversations. So there was no progressive discipline file, no written performance, and no formal warning on record. So the employee retained a lawyer, filed a wrongful dismissal claim, and without documentation, the organization couldn't demonstrate just cause and ended up settling with $40,000 in lieu of notice. That $40,000 is often the entrance fee into a human rights tribunal. If you get to human rights tribunal, they'll often provide a settlement amount to be paid. So write it down. Even if it's a verbal warning, you must follow up with documentation. Progressive discipline is in writing. Every conversation needs to be followed up in writing, and the termination letter must specify the effective date, the reason for termination. I would often not recommend that you don't terminate somebody for just cause. It would just be, we're ending the relationship. Here's your payment in lieu. Move on. Marta, I'm just going to keep moving through and then get to the end. So some take-home resources. So in your HR starter kit that you will get after, these resources are included. So there's policies, onboarding, policies around records and compliance, recruitment, volunteer management, and there's some resource links as well. So pretty much what we've gone through today. So, and the guide will take you through where you need to be. So I would say start with week 1. If you don't have any policies, review all your current policies, employment contracts. Next, and then the following month, draft up your code of conduct and anti-harassment policies. They're in the guide. Make sure for the next quarter, you're going back and you're checking and implementing all your structures, onboarding document, etc. So, tip, you don't need to start with everything at once. Start with what protects your staff and organization most. That's written contracts and an anti-harassment policy. Right? I would also add a code of conduct. So key takeaways. HR is everyone's responsibility, not just for large organizations. Ontario's ESA or your province's equivalent sets legal minimums for an employee from day 1. You must comply, no exceptions. Equitable policies protect your staff, your clients, and your organization. A structured documented hiring process reduces bias and legal risk. Volunteers also require clear roles, agreements, and the protection of your code of conduct. If it isn't written down, it didn't happen. Document every significant HR decision and start with a ESA compliance checklist and the missing policies. So, thank you for being here with us today. Every step towards fair and equitable HR counts. So, homework. What is one HR challenge your organization is currently navigating? Which topics from today feels most urgent for your organization and why? And what is one thing you will do differently about after today's session? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ingrid. We do have a question.
Okay.
This question is, what should be included in a liability waiver for volunteers who support my organization off-site?
It really depends. If they're off-site but they're using their car, you need to take that into account, right? They should still have their own insurance for the car, but if they get into a car accident and they say they were doing volunteering on behalf of the organization, you could get a lawyer sending you documents saying they want the hours of work they were working or volunteer. So I would say go to your insurance provider and check about your liability for volunteers. And they're going to go through a questionnaire with you and ask you, what are the volunteers actually doing? Okay. You're welcome.
Just checking if there is anything we missed. But there's, if you see in the chat, there's a lot of thank yous, a lot of
You're very welcome.
appreciation for the information, insightful information, and the benefits of the information that you have provided. So there's a lot of comments,
Thank you.
with gratitude. I think if there are any other questions, are there any other questions? You can put up your hand.
And Marta, the recording is going to go up on the site, right? So
Yes,
yeah.
yes. Materials and recordings will go up on the landing page of the project.
Okay. And then come and join us. I think we're doing equitable hiring practices on, is it July 9th?
Correct.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Give you 3 seconds, please. Don't be shy.
Maybe I will ask since there's
Okay,
time.
okay. Yeah.
So when we do, so we're a very tiny organization, and so I'm the ED and I am involved in all hiring processes. However,
Yeah.
I always have at least 1 or 2 people that are employees or volunteers to do the both the sorting out of the resumes and also the interviews. Now, we did hire recently someone who is related to one of our board members, but he wasn't involved in any of the, and we went through the entire process with
Okay.
interviewing for candidates, and she was the best pick. And he wasn't involved in any of the decision making. However, we didn't properly do any kind of conflict of interest declaration, mainly because he hasn't shown up to any of the meetings since since the hiring, but just wondering if there's any risk around that. And I supervise her directly.
Yeah, so any board members need to sign so board members need to sign a package too. They need to sign a code of conduct, conflict of interest, and I usually have them sign a board agreement, which would specify here's their roles and responsibilities. So you should have a board package as well, right? And as part of that, he should have signed the conflict of interest. What you need to do is on an annual basis, as you renew your board or just on an annual process in general, get all your board members to sign a conflict of interest. So that will cover you off, and a code of conduct. And then you need to make sure that any decisions that are made around the person, including hiring that person, are documented and that there's no favoritism, and you should be fine.
So I received a question in a private message.
Thank you.
This question is regards to after the pandemic and working off-site, there was quite a bit of resistance for staff who provide direct services to come back full-time to the office. How can the employer implement a full-time back to the office policy and not a hybrid model that has been functioning and that staff got used to for so long when it's
So
a
you have
case
to,
of direct services?
yeah. So if they're providing direct services and the funder requires that the direct services requires in person, you need to specify that. You need to specify it in writing. You need to give people notice. You still need to give them notice. So as of July 1st, let them know that as of September 1st, they need to be back in the office full time. And what you're doing is giving them opportunities for childcare, for babysitting, anything that they need to do for their fur babies or anybody else in their family. So you give them notice. It is just best practice. But what you need to do when you give them the notice is that it is a funding requirement and a requirement of our services to provide direct services, and we cannot accommodate hybrid or remote work. So you've given notice, and if people give you problems, I'm going to tell you in this situation, you're going to see doctor's notes, all sort of accommodation requests coming forward, and you have to work through that. But what you're giving is notice of a bona fide requirement for people to work in the office. And you are not alone.
Okay, I think that is the end of it. I see no more questions. We check the Q&A. No, there are no more questions. So back to you, Yasin.
I'm just gonna say,
Thank you.
sorry, Yasin. You can
It's
find me
okay.
on LinkedIn if you want to send a message through LinkedIn, and OCASI is going to share all the information. So once you see the information, you'll have assistance. Merci. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid, for such an insightful and engaging presentation. Thank you, everyone, for being present, for your questions, for your comments. And also thank you to our great team of interpreters, Peter and Sarah. The second part of this HR training webinar, Building Equitable, Inclusive, and Sustainable HR Practices, will take place on Thursday, July 9, 2026. Please make sure you're registered. A short survey will launch as you exit the Zoom. You're highly encouraged to complete the survey. That will help us improve future training sessions and tailor to your needs. For your information, I would like to remind you that all resources for governance and financial management training have been uploaded on the Equity Stream program on OCASI.org. You can access slides, recordings, and supplementary materials in English and French. Thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
May I ask a question to OCASI?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Just wondering if we have access to, as non-members, if we have access to OCASIsettlement.org, some of the material there.
Marta, would you like to comment on that?
At settlement.org, yes, you do have it's a website for settlement.org is a website for with information for newcomers. So yes, absolutely, you have.
Oh, sorry, settlement work. I guess at work.
Oh,
the
ad
ones
work.
that you have for your for your members.
The artwork. Well, there are certain areas. The artwork. There are different websites, and we can chat. We can chat separately on it and see what is available to your organization in regards to additional resources that we offer through our websites.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other question or comments from the participants?